Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Inside the Creator's Mind, and can you believe it, we're on to episode 5 already. So today is going to be another interesting topic to discuss here. It's a challenging one. It is what makes game design so hard? Why is it so challenging? And this is a lot of layers to peel back here. Much like a lot of other discussions, I think we're just going to scratch the surface today, and it just allows us to have more episodes of deep dives on different topics. So, with today's topic of what makes game design so hard, I think there's some key things that we have here. First off, I think set structure and thematics. Once you kind of have your identity of what you want your game to be, what do you want it to do, your storyline in place, or your lore, your characters, your world, your base mechanics, your typical amount of cards you want in a deck, how many cards you want to start off within your hand, does your game, you want your game to have a mulligan effect, how many card types there are. In Legions we have Warrior, Unified, Fortified. Those are the only 3 card types you're ever going to find in a deck. So it comes down to how complex do you want it to be. What do you want your game to have be keyword based? What is your attack stats? Do you have attack and defense? Do you have power or toughness? Are you doing it in intervals of single digits? Are you doing it in intervals of tens? Are you doing it in intervals of hundreds, in intervals of thousands? There's a lot of variety there. What's going to be easier is damage dealt over time. How are you going to structure damage? Does your game even have damage? Is it a deck out strategy, or trying to achieve a goal before your opponent, or whatever? So just the thematics of the game, the card structure, the set structure. I think those are the first main challenging points of what makes game design so difficult. Because, like we mentioned before in a previous episode, just because you love it doesn't mean someone else is going to. So you can't really force them to love it. What you have to do is you have to build something that's welcoming, build something that makes sense within your thematics, within your world, and try and tie everything in to pull someone in, like a hook in a storyline, in the first couple pages of a chapter at the beginning of a book, or the first 20 minutes of a movie. You got to pull someone in. So I think that's where it comes down to thematics. If they're opening a booster box for the first time, how your set structure is laid out, how many cards per pack, how many packs per box, what's the rarity pull ratios. Those are all elements that make game design really challenging and difficult at times, because there's a lot of math involved on top of creating the story, creating the characters, building the world, building the mechanics, and the actual flow of a game and how it's going to be structured. Then you got your rulings. Then you have the intricacies of each ruling. What can and can't be done? Do you have phases in your game? Do you have turning points? Is your game played one turn and one turn? Are things played simultaneously? There's a lot of things to hammer out. And then on top of that, you have the mathematics behind it. You got algorithms. You got pull ratios. You got the working pieces of the industry in terms of mass manufacturing and card quality and everything. All of that compounds in to make gaming and designing games really difficult. But when you're really just talking about the game, thematics and set structure, I think, are the number 1 and number 2 things, is because you got to nail the thematics of whether it's just that theme of that set, the theme of your game, how it all ties together. Because honestly, much like relate it back to a movie franchise or a television show. People want the next season, they want the next chapter, and in a trading card game, that's what it's all about, right? All of it obviously is going to be the next set release, the next booster box, the next auxiliary set, whatever it may be. The next thing coming has to fit with your overarching storyline, has to fit with your overall theme. Otherwise, you just have two randomly separate entities, and then your game starts to break down in the early stages. So, thematics from set to set, the direction of your storyline, it doesn't make sense. I think that's huge. Then obviously, like I said, set structure, coming down to the cards per pack, packs per box, boxes per case. Are you doing case hits and stuff like that? Like, that's other things you gotta hammer out that makes game design really challenging. Then that's just the thematics of the set, the thematics of the game, the direction of your game, and the set structure. And then you got to think about the nuances within your game as it's being played. So set to set, you have to come up with a set balance. What is your balancing metric? How do you rate cards on a power scale? Is this card, this type of rarity, only supposed to have one effect, and this type of rarity, multiple effects? And is that a power scale structure? Is your rarity breakdown, does that help with power scale? Are your high rare cards really powerful, or are your low rare cards pretty powerful? Are your high rare cards just chase? Do they have momentum swinging things? How do you power balance that? And then talking about power balance and set balance, it's creating, like, establishing a floor of your power level in your set, and then establishing a ceiling. Me personally, I'm a huge supporter in the fact of creating what I like to call a power window. And that power window is, like I said, establishing a floor, establishing a ceiling, and playing within those limits. Because inherently in games that are rotational, you can always have rotation as a fallback on cycling cards out of a meta, out of play because of X amount of time that has passed. So you can cycle out power cards through a rotation setup. But in eternal formats or eternal games like Legions is, we don't have set rotation. So how do you prevent cards from becoming obsolete? How do you prevent cards from being power crept out of the game? Power creep is inevitable, but how do you slow it down? How do you manufacture it and mitigate it as much as you possibly can? And I very much believe it comes down to that power window that I have really focused on trying to establish in the game. And that itself poses its own challenges and also adds to what makes game design so hard. Ultimately, it's easy. I can make a card that says destroy a card on the field, but then 2-3 sets later I can make the same card with no cost and say destroy 2 cards on the field. Well, then what's the player going to play? They're going to play the card that says destroy 2 and not the one that says destroy 1. So essentially you power crept a card that's just on a base scale, simply as a card that says draw a card. Then you have another card that says draw 2. Well, obviously you're going to play the one that says draw 2, right? Specifically if it's a no cost. In that situation, you might also play the one that says draw 1 as well and just speed through your deck. But ultimately, what makes game design so hard is those little things, and it's establishing that power window. Now that you have a floor, you have a ceiling, you can bounce back and forth, play within that, and it helps mitigate power creep. But then it also, I think the challenging thing on the back half, as after you've already designed the game, you did the hard work, you lifted the weight, you got there, you released the product, congratulations, you're there, you've established, but you're not out of the woods yet. And I think that that's the next level of what makes game design so hard, is that what do you do in set 2? What do you do in set 3? How is the game going to be impacted after year 1? What are you going to do in year 2? How is that going to impact the next 5 years of your potential set layout, your thematics, your power window? All of those things come into effect, because I think the next challenging thing is knowing what your game needs and planning for it. So, I take pride in the fact that Legions has been built over a span of 10 years. I got a decade's worth of content. I got sets planned for years in advance. 5, 6, 7, 8 years in advance. I have cards and characters and worlds and designs that have been with me for a long time. And, it's like a checklist in studio that you just keep going through. All right, this character is going to show up at this set at this time in the story. When they come in, what do I want them to do? There's all these baseline things established. But one thing I think that gets overlooked in game design as sets go on is that creators don't really look at the big picture. They look at, already I launched the set, now let's focus on the next set. And it's almost like they get trapped in this vacuum of just focusing on that set or what that's going to bring to the game. And they don't look at the repercussions long term, right? And I think that comes with a lot of things, of people being very narrow-sighted and only short-sighted and only seeing what's right in front of them. Ultimately in an indie TCG, you got to live set to set. Your print runs are going to be tight and your margins are going to be small. And like I said in the previous podcast, you have the passion and you got the hustle. And there's all those elements, plus the moving manufacturing parts and the shipping and distribution parts and everything else that correlates and goes into a game design. But when you live set to set, when you plan only set to set, the problem now is because you're not planning for a couple sets down the road, you end up designing yourself into a box. And I think that is a pitfall to some games, and I think that's why they have that concept of the 2-year curse. That games really struggle either during their second year or post their second year because they were just too short-sighted. There's something to be said about playing the long game. Maybe it's just the control player in me, but playing the long game really helps when it comes to set planning. And I think that goes with that final point I was talking about of knowing what the game needs and planning for it. Because you can have all these sets planned out. Great. We have it. We have them all planned out. But I can tell you for sure, especially now with Empires on the Rise being the next set coming, that set has been designed and developed for 6 years. But do you know how many times that set has changed? At least 10 times. Because you have to plan and you have to know what your game needs and figure out how to plan for it. Ravaged Lands came out, established the game, established a meta. Then Bountiful Harvest tweaked that meta and expanded it, changed some of the power dynamics, created and established a new flexible power window. And then Frontiers allowed me to establish a different style of power window and allowed me to bring some legions up, pull some legions down, and create a healthy metagame that flows up and down. And it was an establishment, our first 3 sets, to be able to do something like that. So when it comes to planning what the game needs and knowing what it needs and planning for it, that's where it gets really challenging, because the meta, the competitive play, the community ultimately impacts the design structure and continues to make the game design aspect so challenging. Because ultimately, the more players that play your game, the more cards that get in front of people's eyes, the more decks that gets brewed, the people just ultimately think of things that you're just not going to think of. or they're going to think of things that are so far outside the box that maybe your testing team didn't even think of. So you're doing the best you can to make sure the game stays balanced, the game stays thematically solid, that the set structure is good, the power window keeps moving and working properly, but ultimately reconfiguring your set, continually listening to feedback, and continually making adjustments. It's just a concept of an ever grinding move. It's just constantly this wheel that just keeps going. And, just because you make a successful product doesn't mean you're out of the woods, specifically in the indie TCG space. So I think these are just some of the things that I really wanted to highlight about what makes game design so challenging or so hard. And once again, just like our other episodes, we're just scratching the surface with this, right? So it's just some food for thought, some stuff to get you guys thinking, talking about. I'm always open for the discussion. Please feel free to leave comments. And you guys have been great listening thus far. I know our views are only going up. There's a lot of people that are chiming in, and hopefully this helps people, whether you're a player, a collector, someone who's interested in designing their own game. This is just my voice and what I've learned thus far, and I'm continually learning. So until next time, guys, this was the episode of Inside the Creator's Mind, and I believe it was episode 5 already. So we'll be back tomorrow with another episode. But until then, just have a good time. Enjoy listening. Hopefully you learned something cool. And see you next time, guys. Later.